Good evening. I'm Catherine Slogic, and I'm the Associate Curator of Education at the Mariana Kistler Beach Museum of Art here at Kansas State University in Manhattan. Welcome to Let's Talk Art, a series of monthly discussions with artists and creative thinkers about work in the museum's collection. Let's begin with an acknowledgement that the museum and university stand on the homeland of Native peoples and that this land was taken from them by violence and broken promises. Tonight's talk will last about 20 minutes. If you have questions for the artists, please enter them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your page, and we'll address them after the presentation. If you want to see or enter comments, click on the chat function, which is also at the bottom of your screen. Closed captioning is available for those who want it, and this program is being recorded. I'm here virtually with Jacqueline Bishop, an artist based in New Orleans. The museum has a large number of works by Jacqueline because it serves as the archive of Zanata Editions, a publisher of fine art prints in Shawnee, Kansas. Many of the prints and works are donations from Joe and Barb Zanata. In 2015, the museum hosted an exhibition of Jacqueline's work titled Songs for the Earth. In this Let's Talk Art, Jacqueline will begin to talk about the influence of the environment and culture in her work and how empathy plays a strong role in her creative process. The first artwork she'll discuss is Samauma and is featured in the current Beach Museum of Art exhibition, Inspirations, Art for Storytelling. As the museum is closed due to the pandemic, we've made this exhibition available online through our Talking About Pictures app, which can be accessed from the exhibition area of the museum's website. Jacqueline, thank you so much for joining us from your studio in New Orleans.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here from the swamps. Seems like a very significant way to unite like-minded souls at this time. Thanks so much. Good to see you all.
Great. Let's begin with Samauma, which is full of natural imagery. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about some of the influences in your work.
Yes. Samauma, this was done quite a while back, 7-color Stereograph. In Brazil, considered the most beautiful tree by many people, and also the last tree standing after a forest fire. So when it's absolutely demolished, this tree might be standing, and it's a symbol of all things connected in this piece, human and non-human. Printed by the master printer Terry Weldon in New Orleans.
Maybe in our next slides, you could tell us a little bit more about your technique, because you have some really unusual techniques that you use.
Sure. Let's see, out of the blue, the piece on the right is a lino cut on a commercial map of Brazil, and labor intensive. It was published by Zanata Editions, and a lot went into this: the research, the drawing, the carving, and then manipulating papers for the background. And the birds themselves, as far as the symbolism, they are all extinct. The one up in the upper left is the ivory-billed woodpecker that became extinct about 1942 in my area. And the little piece on the left is one tiny fragment of a 60-foot long installation titled Terra that I started in the mid-'80s and worked on for about 18 years. So it grew from something small to very large, traveled the United States and parts of Canada, all collected from garbage that I collected in third world countries or on travels around the country, and studio floor. They are no two alike, and they represent birds at that time from around the globe of the areas that I traveled or wanted or had studied, endangered rare or extinct birds. And of course, all that has changed now because that was in the early mid 80s. And a lot of the birds have become extinct. But then again, there are those that have been discovered also. I try to mix the different medium in them. There are, like I said, no two alike. So there will be anything from Mardi Gras beads to broken glass from cars that have been broken into, to twigs and acorns and different mixed media, man-made and natural-made. Next. Sonatina, it was the very first piece that I did with Joe Zanata of Zanata Editions, and it was a 5-foot, very labor-intensive collage, and then from the collage, a drawing, and then it ended up, you know, resulting in a lithograph and on paper. And so, wow, this took maybe a year, and I consider it a landscape. There is a landscape underneath, and then the layering of the lithograph of the dark imagery, the silhouettes, is the contemporary landscape on top of the historical landscape that was first made from a collage of 100-year-old women's journals and biology books and song books that I have collected, but all vintage from a very different time. Sonatina meaning small, short sonata. I like the whole idea with this piece anyways, that culture comes from the landscape. And I think that this piece says what I wanted to about landscape. Next. Now, I'm not sure. I think this might be the two pieces that were spliced together, the two original collages with the drawings over it. So that's in your collection. This was a preliminary work before we did the lithograph, and so there will be some differences in the markings, and you can see probably with the way that they are separated, how they could be spliced together to tell a longer version of the story. The work is all about the narrative, and that's part of my influence, are the art history, no doubt about it, and literature, and scientific journals. Next. Oh, yes. If you listen, you will hear. I use Mississippi River water to mix with the watercolors over the collages. Again, the collages are going to be made up of newspress from different third world countries I travel, and different vintage publications I collect to use for my storytelling underneath. And then it all started in the early or mid 90s when I was deep in the forest in the Amazon, camping out for a couple of weeks, as I did for 15 years or more, 17. And our water was getting low, our clean water. So I decided that I would use the water in the river. And it dawned on me that mixing Amazon river water with watercolor was also mixing different chemicals from the animals and the other natural elements, including all the chemicals from other people. So I started making a practice of that with other rivers, and now the Mississippi River and Gulf Coast. I've used the Ganges in India, and the Pearl River in my other studio in Columbia, Mississippi, near my home. So it's an interesting challenge to use different waters with different chemicals, kind of pull all the rivers on a global level through the art. And on the right is collecting water in the Mississippi River near my house in New Orleans. Next. Order of Diving Birds and Twilight. Or I think these are 24 by 18, something like that. Also watercolor with Mississippi River water. I did a dozen of these that were shown in Art Miami several years ago. And also the storytelling, global stories as well as personal and local. So you can study them and read your own messages. Next. This was a new series I started in 2009 and put in a drawer for about 6 years until I wanted to see where it was going. And again, using elements from the landscape, in this case, cotton, 100% cotton on vintage dresses. I liked the whole idea of landscapes on the dress. The dress, of course, is loaded with symbolism globally. And this is homage to Rachel Roush, who was a 17th century painter, Dutch painter, who actually experienced international fame with her flower paintings. That's what women were expected to paint. And unless they were supposed to be sewing or spinning, cooking or gardening. And they, the dresses all have their own little ecosystems painted on them. Preparing them in the same way I would a canvas takes days to get it set in a certain motion that I need to tell the story. And I like the whole idea that that Rachel was one of the few women who did have international fame, because so many women then also had to have their professors or their husbands sign their work. They were not even allowed to sign their own work. This is homage, this entitled Human Threads was the exhibition title, and I did, I don't know, 15 or 20 of the dresses. Next. So I like the whole idea of the connection to the cotton and our history with it here in this country, especially the South, to forced labor, and also its connection to the human directly, cotton. And this is like a prayer and necklace. On the right hand side, necklace, you'll see the rosary beads hanging in the trees, Mardi Gras beads, but it is actually a rosary, but they resemble Mardi Gras beads hanging in the trees and during Mardi Gras parades as the floats are floating by. And in this case, it is our forests, our trees, our landscape in the canoe floating by with Mardi Gras beads or rosary, because our landscape is disappearing every day. Next. Lace makers. On the left is a collection of birds at the bottom that feel like scalloped edges of lace. And they are actually making lace out of remnants of the natural world. So what is left? And nonfiction Louisiana Field Guide is a vintage Swiss Batiste baptism dress that was given to me by Margaret Osfield, the curator at the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts, who had a couple of them, and I really didn't want to take them, but I obliged. And this piece I titled Nonfiction because it is true that many animals are going extinct, and how will that affect the field guides in the future? And next. Natural History and Peaceable Kingdom have sort of a mound shape to both of them. I did a series of those. I'm not sure where it comes from, but I'm thinking that years ago when I went bird watching in Alabama, and there was this beautiful Indian mound where we could go in, and the birds were endemic to this area, and it was kind of a sacred place. And for the Indians and it was made of shells, and it was a very high up, well planted, beautiful area. But at the time, there were some developers that wanted to dismantle it to actually turn it into transform it into a parking lot. And of course, we signed petitions, and it's still there. It's a park now. It's a national park. But natural history is composed of animals and that are not necessarily from the area, but the fact that the actual Arctic is melting so quickly, they are discovering humans and animals that are appearing right out of the ice, and some of them actually have DNA of bubonic plague and other pandemic viruses, pandemic possible. And so I couldn't help but wonder at the time, like, what is that going to happen in the future with all of these different viruses? They have no vaccines for these in the past. They're resurfacing, coming full circle. And here we are with this pandemic with no vaccine. But it's also interesting that as the Arctic melts, Louisiana loses more land. The water is going up. And so whatever happens, because of everything is connected, whatever happens, it will affect our own landscape. And Peaceable Kingdom. I'll let you study that one. Next. I like the whole idea of painting very thinly and with very delicate lines. There was a time in my life where I painted much thicker and more painterly, but I really like the, it's hard to find that delicate line and to make it as delicate as possible that would still carry over into some sort of a powerful statement that I would want to say with powerful imagery and delicate lines. I love that whole contrast. And this is titled A Garden Grows, which will be in an upcoming exhibition at Arthur Roger Gallery in October for a show focusing on empathy. Any questions?
All right, thank you so much, Jacqueline, for sharing this. We do have quite a number of questions. So I am going to kind of go through those with you. The first question you started to answer, but maybe you might want to add a little bit more. Cheryl Snay asked, why in particular birds?
Well, birds are vast. They're all over the world, and they travel, and they have information. And when they're not around, there's a problem. And I love the symbolism of birds, and I love how they have filtered it into all different cultures all over the world, whether it's dance, song, poetry, painting, whatever. I just love that. I mean, it's on the cave walls. So I think that I got very interested in birds when in the mid-'80s, I was painting them and not knowing very much about them. And then I had to do more research to find more birds, and I found that, all of the colorful ones are the male birds, and the drab ones are us female. And then, I found out why, so that the female bird could protect the nest and everything. Well, in the process of doing Terra back in the 80s of over 600 bird species, I realized that a lot of the birds I had been painting were indeed extinct. And that just kind of hit me like, wow, I wasn't going there for this. But after you learn more of this kind of actual activity going on in your own environment, there's really no going back to not knowing it. You just kind of want to do something with that. And that's kind of made me pay more attention to birds, and then start bird watching, and then start traveling with ornithologists, mammalogists, ethnobotanists, and botanists. You know, the scientists I learned so much from, as well as my own studies and traveling. I hope that answered.
Yes, Shauna would like to know if you were influenced or read National Geographic magazine growing up.
No, not too much, no. I don't know that I probably read it. I don't remember. Beautiful magazine, but I do read natural writing. I love Barry Lopez. I read more philosophy on the natural world. I love Dr. Carolyn Merchant in Berkeley. When her one statement sticks with me all the time: the world we have lost is organic. And I just think that's so, so profound. I used her book, The Death of Nature, in my class when I was teaching art and the environment at Loyola. And it just says so much, because it kind of unites us all. The world we have lost is organic. That's not separating anybody. That's uniting the world. We are losing our organic world. And so I sort of went in that direction with philosophy. And of course I had a philosophy background, so I like environmental philosophy, and hung out with a lot of environmental philosophy professors. And then I read my own. I collect their work.
Great. Tian Tran, this kind of relates, asked if within the last 10 years, has climate change and environmental activism really impacted your work? So maybe a few examples, because yes, I know it has, but maybe some specific examples of how climate change and the environmental activism has influenced your work.
Well, I don't really know how to answer that, because it's always been there. I mean, I've been focusing on and studying and exploring environmental issues for the last 40 years without realizing it. I mean, it was in my graduate work at Tulane. I didn't even know it at the time. And it took, maybe 10 years after that to realize where I was going. So I guess it was always there, just part of who I am, but also the fact that I do like landscape painting and the history of landscape painting. No matter how much you try to change a landscape painting or try to make it into something else, it really always goes back to the landscape painting, and I don't have a problem with that. I just make it more into a personal story. But yeah, climate change is definitely in the work, but it has been, even before it was popular or accepted, even though, by whoever's not accepting it, can't speak for them. But
another question is related to this, and in specific the pandemic, which I think you talked a little bit with this last work, last few works about the pandemic, but how has that shaped your current work?
Well, that too is a part of it, because I think the pandemic is related to climate change. And I think that if we will just start looking in our own environment, our own backyard, we will see some of our practices are taking us to continue in that direction. I like to think that the world would see the connections of our anthropocentric practices. Anthropocentric, meaning the world is here for our needs and our wants, regardless of the ramifications. And I think that once people could finally connect with that's what they do, maybe they could correct that, so that, there's no going back. We are in a pandemic. It's not going to ever be what it used to be. And I think that's probably going to filter more into the work, in my work, and all artists' work.
I have a couple of questions sort of related to color. One is about the impact of the Mississippi River water or the different river waters on the colors you use. And then I'll have a second one about color.
Okay, and so they're asking the impact of the color or the impact of the paint itself?
Of the water on the color of the paint.
Well, it doesn't really change the color, I don't think, but it does change the sort of the medium, because some of it gets grainier. And then depending on the paper that I put it on, because I love this, that all the different papers that I am using in the collage are from different parts of the world, made from different trees, made from different chemicals. So I've got all these different chemicals going on in one piece. And sometimes there's very strange things that happen, you know, the reaction with the watercolor and the chemicals. Now, when I was using watercolor from the Gulf of Mexico after the BP oil spill, there were some strange things happening with that on the paper. And it depended on, like, if it was happening on a paper from Brazil, that was a little bit different than paper from India or Bangladesh. So it was kind of interesting just to kind of let the paper, the watercolor do what it wanted to do on the drawing. I mean, sometimes I just didn't have control. So I think that's the chemicals, I don't know. I mean, I think it's pretty fascinating. I collect them in jars and I watch the sediments, you know, go to the bottom of the jar, but also there's chemicals you can't see, just the reaction.
So, and then also related to colors, this is from Dorian Bennett. Your colors are so strong and beautiful, while some of the subject matter is so troubling and in danger. How do you handle the juxtaposition of these two things?
Well, that's what I work so hard to try to do. I like the whole idea of captivating a viewer, and maybe they will think that it's a pretty painting, and then they have to study it. Sometimes maybe if they don't study it, they'll just walk right by. I don't know. I don't want the paintings to have the same reaction from every viewer, but I think that color, you know, is a language, and I like using it. I was very lucky to have an incredible color theory professor at University of Kansas, and we were not allowed to paint or draw or doodle or chew gum or anything. We had to mix colors for 3 hours to find your personal palette. And so, you know, that doesn't ever leave you, and color is very important. Now I am trying to limit my color, and not to be monochrome, but trying to limit it to as few colors as possible and still make it feel alive and with lots of light. And it's not easy to do, but I love the process.
Great. This is a question maybe more about sort of the philosophy. Would you call yourself an eco artist? And if so, what is the difference between landscapes and eco art, if any at all?
I do not consider myself an eco artist. I am a painter who explores environmental issues and landscape issues. I'm interested in the politics behind landscape. And I'm also interested in finding the poetry in the politics. That's kind of, I think, what artists do. So no, I am not an eco artist. I would not consider myself that. But I have been influenced by the history of landscape painting.
Well, Jacqueline, thank you. You've been very patient with our questions. I know we haven't answered quite all of the questions. If you do have a question that we have not answered, if you will put it in the chat or in the Q&A, we will work with Jacqueline to get you an answer for that. We also hope that you would enter any feedback for us in the chat box before you leave. Our next Let's Talk Art is with Manhattan, Kansas-based photographer Doug Barrett. It will be at 5:30 p.m. on September 10th. And finally, I'd like to thank John Murray and Global Campus and Jen Harland, who works with our office, for all of their help tonight. Thank you so much. And Jacqueline, thank you for being here. This has been wonderful. I will just mention that if you want to, Jacqueline does have a website, which I will post, or maybe Jacqueline can put that in the chat. And she's also represented by the Arthur Rogers Gallery in New Orleans.